Thank you. So with all that being said, I am not here representing Toro. I'm not here representing myself. In fact, the bio that was read is from the NIGP site where I serve as a business council member. So if I can get this working here. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. What's that? Oh, yeah. Okay, unless you can show me how that works.
Ta-da.
Okay, that's right. Okay, so I am the government contracts manager, changed from a government sales role, and now manage all of the government contracts for the Toro company. So I've been working with procurement agents for quite some time, even prior to my time with the Toro company, and working with public procurement agents, also training with public procurement agents, and really trying to build a gap between the supplier community and the practitioners, you all. And so I often find myself speaking to groups and relating to the groups as though I'm on the public procurement side. And so excuse me if I have some of that terminology where I say us or we, because it really seems like that's the area that I work in. With the NIGP Business Council, there are a number of companies that serve on the Business Council. How many of you are familiar with the NIGP Business Council? See quite a few. Every year we participate in the forum and create a presentation such as this, where we help and identify areas of interest and concern for public procurement agents in terms of connecting and working with the supplier community. And so that's what we're doing here today. As an enterprise sponsor with the NIGP Business Council, we share the same values as the NIGP as far as accountability, ethics, impartiality, professionalism, service, and transparency. Hazel, if I can do the next. These are the companies that serve on the Business Council. There are currently 11 companies that serve on the Business Council. Each of these companies get 2 representatives from their designated companies to serve on the Business Council. And again, these companies are really thought leaders in the industry. They work directly with the board on the NIGP to really develop, again, a smooth transition between becoming allies between practitioners and suppliers, as opposed to adversaries. And so, again, we work with NIGP to help drive the education component, research, and advocacy mission of the NIGP. So with that being said, we sat back last year and we talked with, we did a survey and talked to practitioners about what is it that's causing concern for you, what's keeping you up at night. And one of the things that we talked about is market volatility. So market volatility for us was defined as a number of things. We sat there and we developed a list of what market volatility meant for your organizations and how that would impact with the supplier community. So what we came to is a couple of items that we narrowed it down to. Again, I could sit up here for probably 4 hours or more and talk about market volatility and what that means. What that doesn't mean is talking about the political landscape. So regardless of which political party you represent, there's always volatility going on. Right now, there seems to be more issues with that than in more recent years. And so we're taking a look at what that means from the supplier community and what that means for you as a practitioner. So what we're looking at is the economic and employment impact of market volatility. Again, this list could be 20 things long in terms of what market volatility means. We're going to narrow it down to those 2 things. So for us, we're going to discover and share examples of what market volatility means and how that is impacting the economy and the workforce. And it says here, share collective best practices and navigate the market shift. I'm not going to share all the best practices here. I'm going to share some of the best practices that we've had from the Business Council. We presented this at Forum. We've had the opportunity to come out and speak at other chapter events. And what I want to do is get you all to share some of your best practices as we talk about the shifts in the market, what that means. So the first one is economic, and I'll have you just go to the next one here, is talking about product sourcing. So the impacts of market volatility and product sourcing, we're going to talk about gray markets, manufactured goods and raw materials, and then the pricing and tariffs. And that's always one that really kind of raises a conversation quite a bit, is the tariff conversation. First is gray markets. How many of you have heard of gray markets? I see a couple hands here. Does anyone want to share what is a gray market?
I've been experienced with, like, when you buy cameras. You know, you can either buy from the gray market or USA vendor. Handheld microphone.
Perfect. So we'll go to the next one here, which is the definition, Hazel, of gray markets. Gray markets is a trade of a commodity through a legal or through channels that are legal but unintended by the original manufacturer or trademark proprietor. So perfect example there. It's different than the black market. Black market is buying illegal goods. Gray market is legal goods, but purchased through an outside avenue. Have any of you experienced that in your procurement? The one that comes up, the biggest one that comes up for us, and it has come up in every session, is one of a large online purchasing website. I won't name the name, but it starts with an A. And I believe most of you have experienced that and may use sites like that, if not that site, where they represent number of suppliers. It may not be the original manufacturer. It may be a third party that's representing that product. Again, show of hands, how many people are using sites like that? Most people. So with that said, what kind of policies and regulations do you have around that? Do you have a specific policy around using sites like that to protect against inadvertently buying gray market goods? Does anybody have a policy around that? I see the one that has the definition of gray markets.
Mm-hmm.
Without saying.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. I guess, I don't know if we're not supposed to say the name, but
That's fine. It's
when
fine.
we use Amazon as an example, we're required to use items that are prime and that they only can be Amazon company. We can't use any third-party sellers. So that way we can stay away from it. If we do get a product and it's not what we want, we can return it without any issues.
Okay. How many of you, and we will use Amazon, it's perfectly fine. And I'm not up here talking specifically about Amazon. Amazon is just one component, and Amazon is a perfectly viable solution for many products. They just have to be probably the most prevalent within the market and have both sides of that, where they have the third party and also the original manufacturers represented. With that said, the one piece of advice that was talked about in previous sessions is the business side of Amazon. So apparently there's a business component, or is it a government component specific to purchasing?
It's a business component.
A business component. And so with that, I know from other experience as well, within there, you can specify what products, what services are involved in that. So one way specific to Amazon to work with gray markets and to protect yourselves from those gray market products is to work through the business side of Amazon. What happens is there's a lot of rogue spend. My previous background was office supplies, and so when we look at toners and paper and such, there's a lot of third-party manufacturers that represent, and think about ink cartridges and things like that. You can buy products that maybe seem too good to be true, and they really are. And Hazel, if you could go to the next one here. We talk about some of the best practices. So as we identify how to work with gray markets, we talk about working with the original manufacturer, authorized resellers. When in doubt, let the manufacturer tell you who they represent or who they allow to represent their products. Another best practice is to ensure the packaging and branding aligns with the OEM. So what you'll see, if you've questioned it, is you look at products that maybe doesn't look like what you thought it would look like. And so that's something that should cause a red flag. And so take a look at those. And then also your contracting language. In your contract, do you specify what that product has to be? Do you specify that it has to be an original product? Or is it vague language, as we were just talking about with cooperative purchasing, that doesn't really specify what you're getting? An example came with when I presented this with Gray Bar. Gray Bar is electrical. They had a situation where they were working with a large college, large university that went up for RFP for a large electrical purchase. This was about $500,000 purchase. And they ended up getting the same equipment that the Gray Bar authorized reseller offers for about $300,000. They saved $200,000. And so on the surface, that sounds like a great deal. But when they went to get the electrical installed, nobody would touch it because it wasn't warranted, especially in electrical area where there's something of high risk and high dangers. They want to make sure that it is the original equipment. What happened in that situation is Gray Bar actually worked with that university. They knew them quite well. They worked with another person who would come in and authorize the product that they purchased. So in this case, Gray Bar ended up stepping up to the plate. The college ended up paying more than what they would have otherwise, but they had to then get the equipment certified and have somebody install it that would be willing to. Now, again, that's a win-win, or I guess a solution where they were able to overcome those issues, but one that could have been very costly to that university and was a cost to that university overall. So what we talk about is buyer beware of third-party websites, counterfeit products, being suspicious messaging. We've probably all seen that either in our personal life or professional lives as well. But the one that stands out to me the most is too good to be true. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So you'll see and hear a lot of times where, again, you have departments that are buying stuff and they're going out and buying it rogue because they found this great deal down the street. Well, that doesn't always mean that it's the right product or it's a warranty product or a protected product. So our point here is to make sure that when you're doing your purchasing, do the due diligence to make sure that the departments and those who are buying products and equipment are doing it through an authorized reseller or original manufacturer. Next one. Next one is manufactured goods and raw materials. So as a practitioner, you may not purchase raw materials. Markets shift and influences the final price of products. So if you're not buying the actual raw materials, it could impact the product price of the equipment that you're buying. If you can go to the next one, Hazel. These are not an exhaustive list of items that represent raw materials, but they're some of the biggest ones that impact raw materials. Oil pricing. Oil and petroleum is in most things we buy, plastics, whether it be actual fuel for vehicles and so forth. Wood and pulp, cut sheet paper, again, going back to my Office Depot days, that certainly can fluctuate significantly, and lumber costs. So again, one of our other members is Home Depot, so we joke that, from Office Depot to Home Depot, the wood really and the pulp impacts the cost of materials. For me, working with Toro, the biggest is the copper and steel, actually aluminum and steel for us. Copper certainly works into many components, whether it be microchips, to wiring, etc. But the steel and copper. So as we look at raw materials, there's certainly a number of things that will play into. So for example, when the price of steel and copper, aluminum go up in, let's say in China, we buy mostly domestic. We buy mostly US made products. However, when the price goes up elsewhere, when the market allows that price to increase, so does the price domestically because of supply and demand. And so we then, to produce the products that you all take possession of, has a significant increase in those prices as well. So our conversation on this is to really work with your suppliers and understand those cost impacts and how that influences the contracts that you have in place. You know, the conversation when we did this at Forum was outstanding. We had Taylor Adams. Do most of you know Taylor from NIGP? So Taylor is the Deputy Director for the City of Virginia Beach and also the President of NIGP. And so he worked, of the board. And so he works with a lot of the supplier community, the business council as well. Mike Beavis is another one that works directly with us in the connection and the bridging the gap between suppliers and practitioners. He said it best, and this was having that resource up here and talking about it. This wasn't something we came up with. This was something that he just ad hoc added in our conversation. Is the bill is coming due, and so there's a couple ways to look at that. One is you all have contracts that are in place that hold pricing for a specific amount of time. When you do that, how it's typically done. Again, we have products, we have raw materials that increase in pricing, and so we look at that and how can that impact the end product. We may have to adjust pricing at some point, right? So pricing can adjust, and there's two ways to handle that. One is you can stick with the current contract, get those prices for the term of that contract. What happens then is when you go out to resolicit, all of a sudden that pricing jumps up significantly. So what we're talking about is working with suppliers to help modify the pricing in between. So you may not take that full jump in pricing. That pricing may modify just slightly to help offset some of that pricing. I know from a manufacturer standpoint, we are constantly looking at internal costs to help reduce those fees as well. And so we talk about how can we work and partner together to evaluate contracts, to look at the contracts, to make sure that we are providing you with the best value that we can on an ongoing basis. Let's see here. The next one is tariffs. Excuse me. So this is the one that really raises probably the most conversation and the most interest is tariffs. And tariffs is a tax or a duty that is imposed on imports and exports. This fluctuates. There's always changes with tariffs. There's tariffs that may be coming up. There may be tariffs that are going away. How many of you have language written into your contracts that specifically address tariffs? Anyone? I see one hand.
Wow.
So with tariffs, again, as I just mentioned, tariffs are something that are often changing and fluctuating. We had one in Canada. This is a strange, I think, but an interesting tariff that is on mowers. So mowers of a specific size had a $10,000 tariff on them. $10,000 tariff to sell a mower or transport a mower into Canada. Now, if we remove the cutting deck and sell the cutting deck separate and the tractor separate, no tariff. Put them together, it's $10,000 extra. Well, as a large manufacturer, we can't just change the way that we ship and the way that we we assemble products, not overnight. It takes a little bit of time. So we are working on that. And in terms of how can we get around the tariff, right? So we looked at that. We're in the process of working on that, and the tariff actually went away. So for the time that we did have it, we had it for over a year. It was in place. And so this is an actual line item separate from the cost of the products. So you'll see the end user is responsible for the cost of the tariffs. You'll have the product price, you'll have taxes if there are taxes. You're not working on taxes. So you'll have product pricing, maybe setup or delivery fee, and then there's the tariff price. So that is a separate price. Some people are building that into the contract to address for tariffs. And I know you mentioned that you have some language in there. Do you mind sharing what?
With all contracts, but specifically with steel, when there was all this stuff in the media about it going up, we just did a clause to
just the specific commodities, do we have that language? And a lot of it's just media based. When the steel prices went up, we just contacted the vendor and had them sign an addendum to the contract saying that we would not be affected.
Okay, yeah. And steel is a great example as well, because for a very long time, a year, 2 years, steel prices, more than that, steel prices have been doing this. They've just been going up significantly going up, over 30% in the last 12 months. However, in the last few months, steel prices have been coming down. And so if we look at where the steel price is today versus where it was even 6 months ago, we're significantly lower. And so the tariffs, again, as a separate line item, are one aspect of it. The price that I mentioned on the raw materials, that can fluctuate both up and down. So when I talk about the pricing, that doesn't mean just adjusting the pricing to increase. It means to adjust pricing to decrease as well. So when those raw materials come down in pricing. So that's another example of that. You go to the next one. So there's a number of strategies. We talked about partnering with suppliers to plan and prepare. The second is to review contracts and product impact. The third is identify potential product alternatives. So where you have the ability to source either a domestic product that may have avoided the tariff situation, or to import from another country. I know a lot of manufacturing is switching, or changing from China to India, to other areas that you may be able to avoid the tariff additional costs. Number 4 is determine demand. So what impacts the cost increases and strain, specifically on the domestic products as well. 5, the risk management is assess the financial risks and budget impacts. The one thing that I hear a lot is, as I sit up here and have conversations with practitioners about, costs are changing, and this is a hard conversation to have with a group of procurement agents who are looking at it and saying, all right, we get costs are changing, but we need costs to remain consistent because we have a specific budget that is being sent by the departments, right? So a department has $50,000 to spend on this widget. Well, just because your costs are going up doesn't mean we now have more budget available. So we get that, we understand that from the supplier community, but we need to work together to understand how can we provide the best products and services. Can we look at sourcing elsewhere? Can we look at an alternative product? Are there other solutions that we have that may work for what you're trying to accomplish? And then the last is develop and execute a strategic sourcing action plan. So this is something that NIGP talks about. There's strategic sourcing action plans on the NIGP site. You'll see a lot of resources on the NIGP site if you're familiar with those, the resource area. And so we recommend working on that and developing your own strategic sourcing action plan if you don't have one today. So who here has a strategic sourcing action plan? Anyone? And again, it's really a matter of definition of what strategic sourcing is. I understand probably most of you have a sourcing or a purchasing plan in place. So again, looking at what the strategic action plans are, look on NIGP, and they talk a lot about this in terms of how to develop a strategic action plan. This takes everything into account that we just talked about with the gray markets, the manufacturing goods, prices of raw materials and so forth, and tariffs. Let's see here. How many of you currently connect with your suppliers on a regular basis to have strategic conversations? I see a few here. How often do you meet?
Depends on the vendors, some of them are quarterly, some are annually.
Quarterly or annually? Okay. Anyone else? Do the rest of you not meet with suppliers?
I think we're pretty much retroactive rather than proactive in
Yeah.
that area.
So just when needed, right? So where needed, you'll reach out and connect with them.
Can you define the purpose of the discussion? What would be on the agenda of a meeting with your supplier?
Great question. So the question is, what is the purpose of or the agenda for meeting with the supplier? Again, as we look at combining or building allies as opposed to adversaries, that's kind of one of the terminologies that we talk about. Again, this is where if I get off script, I can have a lot more meaningful conversation. It allows us to share from a supplier community what's going on in the market, what's new, what's out there that you might not be aware of. And I know I have a slide on this coming up, but one of the things that we talk about is partnering together so that we can help build a strategy for your upcoming purchases within our category. Again, identifying what needs you have, what's new to the market, because you're not experts on every piece of equipment, every product, every service that you're purchasing, right? So you're purchasing for a number of different departments that have different needs. And they may put in a request and say, I need this, but why do you need this? And so from a supplier standpoint, we want to both meet with the end users, but also with the procurement folks as well. So the buyers, the procurement directors. From my standpoint, I don't sell. I work with our distributors and I train them on how to work with government agencies. The number one thing that I talk about, and we sell equipment. So our guys, and it's mostly guys, that go into the field, they drive up to a park or they drive up to a golf course and they know exactly who they're going to talk to and what they're going to talk about. They're going to talk about equipment. And they dress perfectly fine, but they're not in a suit. They're not in necessarily business casual. It's probably khakis and a golf shirt of some sort. So to go in and talk to a purchasing agent or a buyer is out of their comfort zone. They don't know what to talk about. They don't know how to address it. They're intimidated, right? They walk in, you're wearing nice clothes and a suit. They might have had to pay for parking if they're going downtown. This is stuff they're not used to. And so by going in and talking to you and understanding how do you want to purchase, the first thing that I ask when I go into a purchasing agent or meeting with a purchasing agent is, how do you want to buy? Because how you want to buy is how I want to sell. If I don't understand what are the processes to your buying, I don't understand how to get the products that you need or your end user may need into your agency. So by meeting with the suppliers, I think it gives a good connection for you to be able to explain how you want to purchase as well as what products, what's new. Again, they don't need to educate you on every aspect of equipment, but maybe there's a piece of equipment that does multiple things that hits a couple areas where you're seeing it coming in from your side that says, well, I need this widget here and I need this widget here to do two different things. Well, what if there was a widget that did both of those things and I can save some money doing it? You don't know that unless you are meeting with suppliers. And it's not, you need to meet with Toro. You need to meet with anybody. If you're purchasing grounds maintenance equipment, meet with all manufacturers. There's stuff out there that I'm not aware of. There's different technologies with batteries, with autonomous, et cetera, et cetera. So to get that understanding is probably the biggest thing. So it's really two-sided. You have a question?
I had misunderstood your question. We meet, I mean, with a lot of our suppliers on a weekly basis. We have.
Everybody loves a microphone in their face, right? All right, so you meet with the suppliers on a weekly basis?
With a lot of them.
Yeah.
Or bi-weekly. But we also do utilities and stuff, so if there is an emergency or whatever, we want that relationship with our suppliers, so in the middle of the night, we can call them and they'll be there for us.
Right, right. And that's another example of it too, right? You're building a relationship with those suppliers who can ultimately help you in emergency situations as well. And so that's where, again, some of that cooperative purchasing conversation comes into play as well. Are many of you experiencing issues with tariffs? So kind of changing that. How is that impacting your contracts or your purchasing? Want to make you run around here?
We just had, where we were ordering furniture for new buildings, we just did a senior center. And when the furniture came in, we got charged with tariffs. So when we went to council for approval, and because it was a lot higher dollar amount, we put in a contingency that it would cover the tariffs, because we don't know what it'll be when they actually come in.
So just because you got the mic, from a budgeting standpoint, how do you or the departments budget for those tariffs?
On this particular thing, we had $400,000 budgeted, and the price of the furniture was like $363,000. So we had enough money to say, okay, let's put $10,000 in for tariff charges.
So you had it set
So
aside.
there was enough, yeah, we had enough leeway.
Are any of you running into that where you don't have enough budget to cover tariff costs? That was another thing that I heard at Forum as well, is there's a number of people who aren't familiar with or aren't aware of it coming down the pike, and then all of a sudden they get hit with it. Now where do we find
Being
it?
a housing authority, we buy lots of appliances, and the tariffs have been problematic because most appliances either are steel or they come from China, South Korea. So it's been an adventure. We've had to rebid things because there's no flexibility. We try to build in flexibility now. And being part of our budgeting team, every year part of my duties are to advise, which is a joke, but try to advise staff on where I see bids going next year. So I try to be a little better than who knows, budget 50% more. I actually come up with something meaningful, semi-meaningful, but really with the steel and the tariffs coming and going, who does know?
Yeah.
But for instance, this year, I think I advised staff to budget 10% more on all their appliances. It's relatively a shot in the dark. I mean, I do what research I can, but it's really subject to the president and Congress and retaliation. So it's a shot in the dark. But we are trying to budget more and more each year, at least till we get through these things. And it is a heck of a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. We got another one here.
And my microphone's right here, so I don't have to have that one. But one of the things we've run into is rather than just money is additional lead times as well. Because while the things that we were making or buying were made here in the US, because other people were trying to also buy the things that were made here in the US and avoid the tariffs, it extended our lead times on anything made with steel, so furniture and that kind of thing. So.
That's a really good point. So lead times is certainly another thing that comes into play with both with tariffs and raw material price increases, is it adjusts the market. And so to your question too, so one of the other advantages of working with the supplier, meeting with the supplier on a regular basis is specifically in an area where there is volatility in the price of products, is a lot of times the suppliers have a good, or at least a better understanding of where that market is going. We see in advance before our distributors. We sell through a distributor network, so we'll know before our distributors can communicate that to you all. We can know when those prices are coming, and then we communicate that to our distributors to help set the stage and let you know what's coming down the pipe. And that's, again, it goes both directions, right? Is a tariff going away? Is it coming up? If it's going away, let's try to wait a little bit. Can you wait on this product for another month? We anticipate that this product is going to remove the tariff here in the next, 4 to 6 weeks. Can we wait on that? So there's a lot of different areas for that, but that's another example of where that can come into play. But lead times is another huge thing. So, that's always usually something that's written into your contracts as well. So we need to either abide by that or let you know what's going on prior to that sale. Anything else? Any other examples of how you're dealing with the tariffs and commodity prices? All right. So the next one is workplace, employment workplace evolution. If you go to the next one. Understanding workplace evolution can help public agencies and private sector prepare for future growth while avoiding getting stuck in the past. And so, again, one of the other areas that I was able to speak on at Forum was with a multi-generational workforce. And so this really plays into that. And talking about, let's go to the next one here if we can. Talking about planning for change in the employment area. So staffing practices, succession planning, and then again, leveraging the supplier community to help understand some best practices with that. We deal with the same things that you do, specifically with employment, right? So we're dealing with aging workforce. We're dealing with a smaller workforce coming in with baby boomers retiring. We're dealing with the changes of new people having to be hired, and again, that information, that long-term experience leaving and often going away with the person that's leaving. And so we are looking at ways that we can help bridge that, and succession planning is certainly one of those. How many of you have adopted a succession plan within your organization? Anyone have a plan in place? See some kind of maybes. So one of the things that we talked about and have talked about with succession planning is, well, how many of you have heard of the gray tsunami? Or the silver tsunami, I'm sorry, silver tsunami. This is something, I don't know where it started originally. I've heard Tammy Rhymes, if you're familiar with Tammy, former public procurement agent for the city of San Diego, and speaker and trainer. So she and I worked together a fair amount, and about 3 years ago, she talked about the silver tsunami. And what that was defined as, and it's not her terminology, but she talked a lot about it, and I want to give her credit for that. But the silver tsunami is that over 50% of the public administration was going to be retiring within the next 5 years. That was 3 years ago. So keep that in mind. Think about that. 50% of public administration was going to be retiring in the next 5 years. I know when I look around at Forum this year compared to what it was 3 years ago even, there's a significant difference in what that looks like. And it's creating challenges. There's a lot of information that's going away with the retirement, the baby boomers that are now retiring and taking that information with them. So what is the succession planning that we need to address because of the market volatility with employment? There's less people to do more work, right? So during the recession, the 08-09 recession, the public administration area, specifically procurement, got cut significantly. And a lot of that didn't come back. A lot of you are probably working with a much smaller number of buyers, purchasers than you had in 2005. And the number of people selling into your area is increasing. So there's more contracts, there's more products, and there's less of you to manage those things. And so, you know, succession planning is probably one of the biggest areas that is of a great need right now for the public procurement area. And that is identifying ways, and there's information on, and I'll talk about this here too in a second, is the resources and so forth. But NIGP has a number of resources for that as well. So from recruiting to training and so forth, there's a lot of information on that. So from a recruiting standpoint, how many of you are having difficulty recruiting and getting people to fill positions? Anyone? I see heads nodding. How are you going about that? Do you have a recruitment plan? Do you have interns? How are you getting people to come into the procurement space? Anyone? So from Toro's standpoint, one of the things that we do is we do internships with colleges and universities. We get people, young people in on a limited basis, and we help educate them on various areas of our business. So that can be in a sales department, it could be marketing, it could be engineering, it could be customer service, a lot of different areas. Again, with purchasing, one of the things that I've heard is, and correct me if I'm wrong, most people don't, and this could be true of any profession, but most people don't wake up and go, you know what, when I grow up, I want to be a procurement person. Does that feel like you? I mean, there's certainly public administration. So just to back this up, I had some challenge on this when I had this conversation before, is there wasn't really a public administration degree 30, 40 years ago. So when a lot of procurement people were coming into this space, there wasn't a lot of knowledge on it. There wasn't a lot of training on it. People kind of ended up falling into it. It usually stemmed from a finance department that had financial or planning. Procurement people have to be extremely planful and detailed. So those areas of experience ended up gravitating towards it. And a lot of people kind of found themselves in the procurement role. And so as we look at recruitment and we talk about succession planning, one of the things that needs to be addressed is how do we get people aware of the public procurement profession? And again, internships is one. A great example of one that somebody mentioned to me at the last session I went to is they're now going out to high schools. So before they're going into college, they're getting people to come and do job shadowing and come into their areas and understand what is public procurement. Again, I don't know all the rules and regulations behind that, what that would take, the undertaking to set something like that up, but they're working again with their local communities and identifying people who may have those types of skill sets that may find themselves interested in a position of public procurement. Again, there's typically something that drove people to a government job versus a private job, right? There's advantages of working in the public space. And so having the ability to share what those advantages are, how we're working with within our organizations, there's a lot of different areas from a buyer standpoint and a procurement director standpoint, and how you work with different departments that really intrigues and interests people outside when they finally learn what that means. And so I'll ask one more time, does anybody have any examples of what they're doing to get interest from either outside organizations or colleges or high schools, anything like that?
And I'll wait for the mic.
Oh, we've got
Terry's got it, okay.
Yeah, Karen and I were debating who got the privilege of speaking. Several years ago, I guess this will be our 4th year, ETPA, the Eastern Tennessee chapter, through a variety of reasons, but we were approached by the University of Tennessee's Masters in Public Administration program. At least that's what it was when I was there. They added another P now, so it's Masters of Public Policy and Administration, I think. But anyway, they asked us to come speak to one of their classes. And so a small group of us, I think 3, started it. And they've invited us back for, this will be our 4th year on the 29th. So we're trying to reach out, not at the high school level, but at the collegiate level, actually the master's level.
Okay.
Because they talk about finance, they talk about, I went through it, they talk about finance, talk about HR, and on and on. But there's no, at least when I was there was 0 mention of procurement. We talked about paying the bills and how you budgeted, but we didn't talk about how the bills got generated. So ETPA has been reaching out, and a few years ago, we had an initiative to try to start a procurement major at a local community college run state. We were never quite able to get that off the ground with the funding for the program, but we're starting to reach out, and I was one of those that fell into public procurement, basically frantically looking for a job, and one thing led to another. And 31 years later, I'm sitting here talking.
Right. Well, and I can tell you, I mean, from an outsider's perspective, I didn't know what procurement was. When I first entered the workforce, I was in a sales position, and I worked for an incentive and recognition company. And when I started working there, I was told, okay, we work with procurement agents primarily. And I went, what is that? Well, somebody that buys, that's a purchaser for the company. Okay, well, it seems like this would be something that is driven towards sales or marketing to help promote and drive additional sales. Well, that's true, but the procurement people are the ones that are really just trying to get the most for the little amount that they can. And that's how it was described to me. And if that's the way that it's being described, I mean, we're way off base on what the purchasing department or procurement division really does within organizations. And so again, that was 20 years ago, but I'm not sure it's a lot different for outside agencies coming into this space as well. So there's education that we're doing on our side as well, and that we can continue to do. And you had an example as well?
I actually work with Terry at KCDC, and in addition to reaching out to the colleges in the area, we also have an internship that we instituted last year, and we publicly advertised that, but thus far, there have been students from this particular program that have shown some interest, and that we had our first last year. We're in the process of hiring the second this year. It's been a good experience because it's not the typical internship where one would make lots of copies, run errands, things along those lines. We actually pull this intern in and give them some real experience in what it is to be in procurement and what we do. One of the great things that they've done is work on a policy and procedures manual, which really gives them some meat of what goes on in our division in particular.
That's great. That's great. All right, if I can have you move on. I know we're running short here on time. This next set of slides here kind of goes through, if you could click it a few times here. Let's see how many there are. Oops. Okay, so this one here is just the quick resource ideas that we've come up with. So procurement code and regulations is something that from a workplace evolution that newer employees need to gain that understanding and knowledge. Internal training at NIGP is the resource that we've identified for that. Category intelligence, that's again working with your supplier and procurement subject matter experts. So again, if there is a specific area within your buying arena that you're not familiar with, working with your suppliers can help educate and give you the kind of the up-to-date knowledge on what's available, but also working with your internal departments. I did a speaking engagement for Fleet Managers Association about a year ago, and one of the things that I talked about was connecting. I talked about bridging gaps early on about suppliers and practitioners. At this one, I talked about bridging the gap between departments and procurement, because there's often a misconception between departments and procurement, right? So procurement may think, this is generalization, procurement may think that the departments want to get what they want to get, and they're not taking into account the fiscal responsibilities that they need to consider. On the other side, the departments are thinking procurement is a roadblock and they're keeping me from getting what I need to do my job. And so I've seen some transition with that, and I've even heard others that are placing procurement purchasers, buyers, in the departments. So rather than having your purchasing department centrally located or located in one area, they're spreading out. This buyer is going to work with fleet, so they're going to be officed in the fleet department. I don't know what's right or what's wrong. I'm just kind of sharing some best practices or some ideas that others are taking with them. But they're doing that so they get the more intimate knowledge of what is going on. What are the impacts? Some resources that I have at the end here is other white papers that the NIGP Business Council created and shared. We did again a speaking engagement like this, roadshow, so to speak. One of those was on total cost of ownership. That was years ago, where I think total cost of ownership is certainly something that's more aware today than it was probably 10 years ago in conversation. The other one is We Know Bid, and I'll tell you why. And that one probably garnered the most interest from the purchasing departments, the regionals, having us come out and speak about why we would no bid a solicitation. So there's resources for that on NIGP that we'll share at the end here as well. Knowledge transfer and training, again, leadership and peer groups. So working with, partnering with others, so you can have a new person and somebody that is more experienced work together to better understand. Also NIGP, I would mention in that, there's a lot of training aspects through the new pathways through NIGP. Contracting solutions, working with suppliers and cooperative agreements. We talked about cooperative purchasing before I got up here, and it's nice to hear that. I think cooperative purchasing, specifically with what I mentioned about being limited resources, doing more work with limited resources, cooperative purchasing gives you that avenue on certain products, certain commodities, right? So it can take that legwork out of purchasing for you on those certain products. Procurement systems can help you streamline the buying or the procurement process, the RFP process. Recommend the resources working with your tech departments, suppliers, and e-procurement partners. And then recruitment, working with NIGP. They have a recruitment section on their website as well. But one of the things is simply talking to your peers here. You know, not only what are you doing, but do you have somebody who's moving? We're looking for this. Does anybody have somebody that's looking to move from this area to this area? I know I saw a lot of that at the multi-generational workforce conversation that we had at Forum. We had somebody moving from one side of the country to the next and had a job before they left, basically. So I realize there's legalities associated with that, but they found a job before they were even made the move. So there's a lot of options with that. Next slide. I think we covered most of this, so I'm going to jump to the end here, which is a quote that we have. It's from Jimmy Dean, yes, the sausage guy. And this was fitting because we had Jimmy Dean had some other stuff at Forum, so this ended up being a coincidence. But I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination. So change is inevitable, and how we choose to embrace that change and will have a direct impact for both practitioners and suppliers. And who we partner with to help navigate those changing winds will really have the biggest impact on that. So thank you for allowing me to speak here today. If you have questions, I'll be around here through the afternoon, but feel free to stop by, grab a card if you have any questions. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.